Hey everyone, it's Rod Santomassimo with the Massimo Show. And I know I say every day I have a special guest, but to me, this is a special guest, and I'll tell you why. But for you, it's a special guest because it's the one and only Mr. Chris Widener, New York Times bestselling author and world-renowned Hall of Fame speaker. Yes, that Chris Widener. Hi, this is Rod Santomassimo, and welcome to The Massimo Show. The objective of The Massimo Show is to share how you can maximize your personal, professional margin. That's right. Let's make more money in less time. Let's turn chaos into clarity, confusion into confidence, and income into real wealth. Along with sharing my insight on how I grew a multi-million-dollar professional business, we're going to bring you the expert advice from a variety of authors, consultants, and thought leaders who will provide the tools you need to maximize your own personal and professional margin. Welcome to The Massimo Show. Chris, welcome to The Massimo Show.
Rod, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's always great to talk to you.
You know, I love you, buddy. And I got to be transparent, folks. As I always share with you that I engage in coaching for myself and my business. I believe in it. We're a coaching business. Chris is one of my coaches. I've had the good fortune of applying and getting accepted, and he has helped me launch my latest book, Knowing Isn't Doing. And with Chris's help and others on our team, and we're so psyched that book became #1 in America on its launch. So, Chris, thank you for that.
Absolutely. You're a great guy to work with.
Well, feeling mutual, bud. But it's not about me. It's about you. And more importantly, this is about our audience. So what we're going to share is how you, as a business owner, solopreneur, entrepreneur, can really build a business and or life that lasts and goes beyond just your lifetime. We're going to talk about that with Chris in his new book. But before we get there, Chris, we're going to the basic questions we always start out with. You are a Hall of Fame speaker, New York Times bestselling author. You're known throughout the world. So how did it all start? Where were you in high school? What were you like?
Well, it all started, I was born in Seattle, Washington. First 50 years in Seattle. My dad died at my age. I was 4, and he died at the age of 41. He was making almost $100,000 a year in the late 1960s. He was the CFO of an architecture firm called NBBJ. And NBBJ is one of the top probably 15 in the world now. At the time, they had about 150 architects in Seattle. But he was severely underinsured. He only had $30,000 worth of life insurance. So my mom had to sell the house that we were living in Sandpoint Country Club. It recently sold for $2.8 million. She had to sell it because she couldn't afford the $400 a month mortgage payment. So that began a downward spiral, 28 homes, 11 different schools, shipped off to live with relatives twice, once in the 4th grade, once in the 9th grade, started drugs in the 5th and 6th grade. By the time I was 8th grade, smoking opium, spent most of my time making money growing up, scalping tickets to the Seahawks and the Mariners games outside the Kingdome and betting the ponies at Long Acres Horse Track. So you're kind of getting an idea here that I was going in the wrong direction fast. Summer before my senior year of high school, I got invited. I was spending the night with one of my big pot smoking buddies, and it was a Saturday night. We probably got high, spent the night. The next day, Sunday morning, his mother at about 8 in the morning threw the door open and said, "Get up, we're going to Sunday school." And I went, Sunday school? Like I had no clue what that term even meant. I had no religious upbringing. Long story short, the youth minister there was a good old boy from Helena, Montana. And he had 2 things that I really needed in my life at that point. First of all, he had size 11 cowboy boots, which was really good for me because I had never had a male role model. I didn't know my grandfathers. My dad died when I was 4, and my brother is 13 years older than me. He left home when I was 4 to go to college, and he married a girl who didn't like my mother. So he was never around growing up. I really didn't get to know my brother until I asked him to be my best man at the wedding when I got married when I was 22. He also, though, as well as being a male role model to me, he taught me about God, and he taught me about purpose and having a bigger vision in your life and knowing that your life is bigger than just little old you. So I've always had this perspective of what is my life worth? What is my purpose in life? There's a bigger picture than just breathing air and trying to accumulate things. And so I ended up going into the ministry, and I spent 14 years in the ministry, which if you want to become a world-class speaker, spending time doing ministry work is really good, because every now and then I'll hear a professional speaker and they'll say, oh, I got hired to do this speech and they wanted me to customize it. They want me to come up with a new speech. I'm like, try being a minister where you're coming up with 3 new speeches a week, 50 weeks a year. So it really trained me actually pretty well. But I always loved public speaking. I started speaking to high schools, summer camps, colleges, universities, things like that, talking about overcoming a crazy youth. And then as I got older, I transitioned into speaking more to adults and things like that, and focusing in on leadership and influence. My book, The Art of Influence, is what most of my speeches are on. I caught a few really lucky breaks in the early 2000s. I got asked to ghostwrite for a guy named John Maxwell. Spent 18 months writing for him, his nationally syndicated column. And then from there, I got asked by Jim Rohn to write with him. I wrote the Jim Rohn one-year program, as well as Jim's last book, The 12 Pillars of Success. And then I had a television show in Dallas, and the network wanted Zig Ziglar to do a TV show, but he was pushing 80. He didn't want to do it by himself. So they asked me to co-host his television show, since I was already down there anyway. So when people say, how do you build a successful speaking career? I say it's really easy. 3-step process. First, have John Maxwell call you. Second, have Jim Rohn call you. And third, have Zig Ziglar call you. And once that happens, it's all really easy from there.
Yeah,
So,
I guess when 3 of the greatest thought leaders of the generation call you, it's a pretty good thing.
but you know what? They could have called anybody. So in a way, it was a lucky break. But on the other hand, if they'd have called me and I couldn't write, it wouldn't have worked. So when opportunity presents itself, you have to be able to walk through the door of opportunity. And so, yeah, but I was also prepared for it. And so I don't want it just to be, stroke of luck kind of thing. I tease it that way, but I was also prepared for that.
So how were you prepared for that? And why these individuals call you? So let's start there.
So I think my preparation was speaking. As a pastor, I was speaking a ton, and you're creating content all the time. So I can create content. A lot of people in our industry are like, Chris is the content king. I was not only doing everything for everybody else, I would written my own 22 books. And the way I built my business was I wrote 400 articles in the 90s, 450 articles in the 90s, and gave them away for people to use on their websites. Because as hard as it is to believe now, back in the mid 90s, people had websites, but they had no content. So I built my own 100,000 person list by writing articles, churning out articles, giving away for free that all drove back to my website and building my email list. Now, the reason that Maxwell and I connected was we had a very similar journey. Maxwell was also a pastor. I was a pastor for 14 years. He was a pastor like 27, 28 years, something like that. And then he switched and became a business speaker, a leadership speaker. So I actually took a graduate level course from John Maxwell before anybody knew who John Maxwell was. It was a ministry course. It was leadership in the ministry. It was at a church called Overlake Christian Church. The school was called the Northwest Graduate School of Ministry. And so I think that they knew that I could speak in his voice. And I think that's probably what got me that deal. And then I knew the folks over at Jim Rohn, and they wanted me to ghostwrite. I said, no, I'm not going to ghostwrite, but I'll co-write. I want my name to start going on it. That's how that happened.
And so how did you get to Ziglar then?
So the first time I ever went to a National Speakers Association meeting, 2002, I walked into the room. It was right before dinner, and there were like 2,500 speakers. I can still close my eyes and picture it right now. I walked in, I'm at the back door, big hotel, throw open those big ballroom doors, look out, thousands of people. And I thought to myself, these guys are all independent contractors. And the guy that's going to make all the money is the one that rolls this thing up. So I went to a buddy of mine and I said, let's roll this whole thing up. So he lived in Seattle, up in Samama, and he has a big, beautiful farmhouse with a big wraparound deck. We spent a summer, the summer of 2004, I believe it was, smoking cigars, drinking bourbon on his porch and calling hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of speakers. And we licensed their audio programs from them. And then we created themes around those audio programs. We ended up with like 48 SKUs, but the 3 top SKUs were leadership. That was one. Sales success was another. And verbal power was another. And it was 14 CDs and 1 DVD. And that was the model, 14 CDs, 1 DVD. We took it to Costco, and Costco said, we'll do it. And then we took it to Sam's Club and they said, we'll do it. So we were selling anywhere between 50 and 75,000 boxes a month through Costco and Sam's Club. And we sold them to Costco for $26. They sold them for $28.60. They marked it up 10%, which is their model. And the way I decided to make myself famous was usually had 4 names on the cover. So what I did was on the covers of these boxes, it would say Zig Ziglar, John Maxwell, Dennis Waitley, or Les Brown, or something like that, and Chris Widener. So I branded myself by selling millions of audio programs with me alongside of these legendary speakers. They knew me because I was writing in big checks every quarter. So that's how I got to know Tom Ziglar. And then they knew that I was doing my TV show. And then Tom and my partner at Jim Rohn International, Kyle, were really good friends, lifelong friends. And when they asked Zig to do the TV show, Zig said, I'd kind of like to have somebody do it with me. And Tom said, well, you know, that guy that's doing the Costco business, he's got his own show on this network. Why don't we ask him? So that's how I got my invitation to work with Zig. And I always tell people, Zig's the greatest man I ever met. The first time I ever walked into the studio, I felt like a priest who'd been called to the Vatican to serve communion with the Pope. You know, it was like, wow, here I am. I'd never met him before the day I walked onto the set. So it was just fantastic.
Yeah, we've had his son, you mentioned Tom on the show before, incredible stories about Zig. And again, for listeners, we have younger listeners. If you don't know Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, John Maxwell, these are thought leaders. Their wisdom is timeless. Their material is timeless. Definitely worth the review and certainly the consumption.
And foundational to the whole movement. What we're doing was really founded on those guys and some of those old original programs like American Sales Masters. There was a thing called American Sales Masters, and they took these guys all around the country and they'd have 10 or 12,000 people turn out for these day-long events. And for those of you who've never heard of Jim Rohn especially, you've probably heard of a guy who Jim gave his first job to, a guy named Tony Robbins. Tony's first job was selling Jim Rohn seminars. That's where he learned the whole business. So Jim has had quite a legacy with a lot of people.
We're going to change gears a little bit. Let's talk about going forward. Chris's new project for all of us to really consume, and we need to, and understand what are we doing now and what are we building and why are we building it? So we'll be right back with Chris Widener. Hey, this is Rod Santomassimo with the Massimo Group. And did you know over the last 12 plus years, we've worked with thousands of independent contractors, solopreneurs, and small business owners in helping them achieve the business and the life that they've always desired. To learn more how we could possibly help you achieve your goals, please visit www.massimo.coach. That's www.massimo.coach. Hey everyone, it's Rod Santomassimo with the Massimo Show, and we're back with Hall of Fame speaker, New York Times bestselling author, Mr. Chris Widener. And wow, the first half was so exciting and so informative. And the people you're talking about, Maxwell and Rohn and Ziglar, wow, some big names. I mean, it's amazing lessons that everyone should be taking away from this is leverage your knowledge, take advantage of every opportunity. Don't worry if you're not ready, but you should be prepared, right? And again, think about how, Chris, you leverage opportunities and names and brands and then say, you know what? I'm not going to be in the back seat. I'm going to be in the front with everybody else. And that takes confidence. It does. It takes courage. It does. But that's why it's so hard. And Chris, that's why you're so special. So let's talk about Jim Rohn. Let's talk about your first book, your New York Times best-selling book. How is that created? And give us a story behind that.
So my best-selling book is the book that I did with Jim Rohn called 12 Pillars. We've never sold it through bookstores. It's all been online and events. We've sold over 1 million copies of that. And it helps when Jim Rohn's name is on it. So the secret to a best-selling book, put Jim Rohn's name on it. But my bestseller, which was through bookstores, produced by Random House, we sold 120,000 copies as a self-published. Then we sold it to Random House, and then they launched it. It was called The Angel Inside. And The Angel Inside, subtitled Michelangelo's Secrets for Following Your Passion and Finding the Work You Love. And I had just finished ghostwriting for John Maxwell, and I wanted to keep all of my own good ideas. I didn't want to give them to somebody else. So I wrote this book. At the time, there were a couple books. The Da Vinci Code was huge. So everybody was into that kind of stuff. And there was a personal development book called How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci, which was a big bestseller. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try and do something like that. I wanted to write a breakout book. I wanted to write something that would be a bestseller. There were 3 people that lived in Florence, Italy at the same time, which is extraordinary because at the time there was only 50,000 people in the early 1500s. And remember, they didn't have all the travel that we can. You couldn't just fly to Florence and, do your thing and visit. So it was Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Machiavelli. Well, I didn't want to write a self-help book based on Machiavelli. And so I chose Michelangelo. And I thought, I wonder if there's enough in his life to do a self-help book. So I spent 6 months studying the life of Michelangelo, everything from reading books to watching The Agony and the Ecstasy, a movie that starred Charlton Heston as Michelangelo. It was terrible. But I studied maps of Florence, everything. And I got 2 pieces of advice that would make this book a bestseller, I believe. The first was from a guy named Charlie Tremendous Jones, who was a contemporary of Ziglar and Rohn and Dennis Waitley and Les Brown and all those guys, but not as famous as them. But he was into books. In fact, if you've ever heard, in 5 years, you'll be like the 5 people you spend the time with in the books you read. Yep. That was a Charlie Tremendous Jones original quote. So Charlie says to me, Chris, make it small. Nobody reads big, thick books anymore. So true story, in Bellevue, Washington, where I lived near Bellevue at the time, I walked into a Barnes & Noble. I walked to the self-help session. I picked up a Ken Blanchard book. I counted how many words were on one page, and then I multiplied by pages, and it was 20,000 words. So I said, okay, I'm going to make my book 20,000 words. The second piece of just random advice was from a guy named Mark Sanborn. And Mark is a well-known professional speaker, former president of the National Speakers Association, been around at the highest levels for a long time. And he says, you should make it fiction. And I went, huh. And I'd already written 2 or 3 books at this point, nonfiction books. And I thought, how could I do that? So I created a story about a young man, 28 years old. The entire book is one afternoon in Florence, Italy. It's the entire book, one afternoon in Florence, Italy, where a young man meets an old Italian man who takes him on a tour of Florence and teaches him life lessons from the life of Michelangelo. And so that book launched. The first week it launched from Random House. It was number 7 on the New York Times, number 2 on the Wall Street Journal, and it was number 3 on Amazon all week long, which was great because then it's on the front page. And the reason it was only number 3 was because number 1 was the pre-launch of Harry Potter. And the number 2 book all week long was the lost book of J.R.R. Tolkien that his grandson found in his attic after his grandpa died. So I'm like, if you're going to be number 3, it may as well be number 3 behind the greatest fiction series of all time and one of the most legendary writers of all time. And that was the story of The Angel Inside.
So what do you think, Chris? What was the draw? What was it that made that book and continues to make that book so popular?
It's one of the best books ever written. I'm telling you, the irony is I was writing this, I was just doing it functionally. Like I was just very pragmatic. I want a best-selling book. In hindsight, it's the only book of mine that I love. I like all my books. All my books are really good, but the one that I love is this one because it became this blend. I think it's the blend. It's self-help, but it's spirituality. It's history, it's art. It's just a rich book that people, when they read it, they would, well, first of all, Zig Ziglar, at the time that he read it, he had not read a fiction book in like 75 years from the time he was a child. And he used to tell people, I'm not going to read the fake stuff until I've finished reading all the truth stuff. That was what he said. His son, Tom, said, you've got to read this book. I know you have a policy against reading fiction, but you've got to read this book. So he did. And I got a voicemail from Zig. Hey, Chris, this is Zig Ziglar. And it's on the cover, the endorsement from Zig Ziglar, that I have not read a fiction book as an adult. This is the first fiction book I've read, and it's one of the most wonderful, motivating books I've ever read. I think it's the blend, history, art, spirituality, self-help. It just turned out to be a really rich book.
Let's repeat that title one more time so our listeners can grab it.
Yeah, it's called The Angel Inside, and the subtitle is Michelangelo's Secrets for Following Your Passion and Finding the Work That You Love. And the 28-year-old kid is like trying to find his passion in life. And that's why he's in Europe. He's kind of gone there to find himself. And he's despondent. The opening scene is him sitting on a bench like this at 1 PM. He's got one afternoon left. He's just spent 2 weeks and he doesn't have a clue what his life is about. So this older man takes him under the wing and teaches him life lessons from the life of Michelangelo.
We're going to get to your big project in a second, your latest project. But I want to ask you from a competitive standpoint, Chris, you're a Hall of Fame speaker. And like you said, I mean, there are tens of thousands of speakers in the world talking about so many things. From a competitive standpoint, what makes you the cream of the crop in the speaking world? What are you doing to stand out?
Number one, I was blessed. When all of a sudden you're writing books with Jim Rohn and doing a TV show with Zig Ziglar, people see you. So now I'm in the world or the ecosystem wherein people know that I exist. There's a lot of people that are better speakers than me that nobody even knows exists. It's like musicians, right? There are singers that are way better than any of, Jay-Z and Adele and, all the big people, but nobody knows who they are. So I just think the fact that I got into a position where I was well known, partly because of my own work, but partly because I got to work with some really famous people. So now I'm in the ecosystem where somebody could name me one of the top speakers. But I think the other thing is I work hard at it. I have some natural giftings. As a kid, my mom bought me a Mr. Microphone. I was in the 6th grade, I think. My mom would walk in from work and I'd be, ladies and gentlemen, Charlotte Widener entering the house, home from work. How was your day today? Like I was just always talking. In high school, remember the announcement came on and there was one of the kids. It was like, today for lunch, we're having fish sticks and tater tots with a side of green beans. That was me, 2 years, junior and senior year. In college, I was the internal college basketball announcer. I sat on the court and did the in-house announcing, announced the starting lineups and all this. And that's a funny thing. I got that job because I was a ball boy for the Seattle Supersonics for 7 years. The guy who did the in-house announcement was a guy named George Tolles. And prior to becoming a ball boy at the age of 11, my dad was one of the first guys to have season tickets. He had 4 season tickets. Our feet were literally on the court, courtside seats. So I had been to hundreds of games before that, listening to George Tolles. I went to 750 NBA games before my 18th birthday. And so jump forward, I'm now in college, and I heard that they were going to hire an announcer for the games. So I showed up and he said, okay, here's what we want you to do. We want you to just jump on the microphone and pretend that you're starting and take us all the way through the national anthem. And they handed us a roster so we could read the names and everything. And they said, who wants to go first? And everybody kind of looked around. They were a little shy. And I heard a tape playing in my head. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times I heard this tape playing in my head. I said, I'll go. They said, okay, go there, press down on the thing. And I literally just did George Tolles. Well, I got the job. So I've always been the talker. I ended up doing drive time radio in Seattle. I was a minister, which you really are giving 3 speeches a week. So I think I have some natural gifts, but then I also worked at them. When I try new material, I'll try it 4 or 5 times in my speeches. And if it works, I keep it. If it doesn't, I toss it. Constantly honing it, constantly looking for ways to move an audience. I've developed a system that I use for myself. And then I got into political consulting when my best friend decided to run for governor, and he asked me to be a speech coach. And it's designed to help speakers run their audiences through an emotional cycle as they speak. We actually created emojis. We could look at a stump speech of a politician and we could create emojis. The hand emoji means that's where you want people to clap. The laughing emoji is where people are going to be laughing. The serious emoji is when people are leaning forward and really thinking. And so what we do is we take people through that so they're constantly running through the cycle of emotions. And what that does, it keeps people engaged mentally at a subconscious level, having to shift from laughing to being serious. It keeps people engaged because studies have shown that only the top 0.5% of speakers can keep an audience attention for more than 20 minutes. When you can cycle people's emotions and keep them engaged, then they don't tune out. So I work very hard at it, but I also have some really good natural gifts.
Well, I love it. I love the hard work. I love the stories. Hey, this is Rod Santomassimo with The Massimo Show. And oh boy, am I pumped. My new book, Knowing Isn't Doing. Well, when it launched, it hit #1. That's right. Top-selling sales book in the entire country on Amazon.com. We're so excited to share many of our proprietary Massimo methods to allow our readers to start finally building that business and the life they've always desired. To get your own copy or learn more, visit www.knowingisn'tdoing.com. So let's talk about going forward. I know you got a big project that's coming out in the first month of the year in 2021. It's your latest book. Can you share with us what the book's about and the message behind the book?
It's called Lasting Impact, Creating a Life and Business That Live Beyond You. When my dad died at 4, I've always known that life is short. You never know when you're going to die. In fact, in Jim Rohn, in my book, 12 Pillars, we talk about how you cannot determine how long your life will be, but you can determine how well your life will be. You can't determine how long you'll live, but you can determine how well you'll live. So I've always wanted to leave a legacy. And it's a big part of what I talk to people about. And so there was a book I read a long time ago. It was a Christian book called Halftime. And the subtitle was Moving from Success to Significance. And now I'm 54 and I've had a lot of successes. I've had best-selling books. I've traveled all over the world, spoken on stages with 25,000 people in the audience. And I ran for the US Senate. I have 4 beautiful kids, 2 wonderful, beautiful stepdaughters. It's been a great life, but how do you make that last? And so I decided I wanted to write a book for people to make sure that their life matters and that it lasts beyond them.
Living life well, I can understand that, especially today where many people don't think they're living, period, versus waiting.
Yeah.
So what are some of the principles, the pillars in your language, to create this lasting? Is it legacy? Is that what it is?
It's a legacy, yeah. First, understand that sometimes you don't know what impact you're leaving. And so you just have to trust. Lorenzo Ghiberti was an artist in Florence about 100 years before Michelangelo. In Florence, Italy, for those of you who've been there, you know the big Duomo, and then across the way is the baptismal. We got married in Italy last year, June 18th, 2019, and within 2 hours of our wedding, we were doing a tour of Florence with the girls, the 4 of us. We hired a private tour guide, and he took us to the baptismal. He stands us right in front of the baptismal, and there's those big golden doors. These doors are 12 feet high, 6 feet across, times 2 is 12 feet across, and each one of them has this etched gold scene from the Bible. Each door has 5, so there's 10 scenes from the Bible. And our tour guide says, do you know how long it took him to do these doors? And people were guessing a year, 2 years, whatever. And our guide says 27 years to do these doors. And he says, do you know what he did before he spent 27 years doing these doors? The doors on the side for 23 years. And I thought to myself, 50 years of this man's life was doing 2 sets of doors. Now, the average American in his 70s would lie there and go, what has my life accomplished? I spent 50 years and all I did was 2 sets of doors on a church. Jump forward 100 years. Michelangelo, who lived in Florence, do you know what he called those doors? The gates of paradise. When the greatest, or arguably one of the greatest artists of all times, calls your work the gates of paradise, pretty good stuff. Jump forward 500 years later, 2.5 million people a year stand in front of those doors and look at them. And his impact, hundreds, 500, 600 years afterwards, still to this day, people stand and you just look at those doors in awe. Now, full disclosure, the real doors are actually now down at a museum down the street. They're replica doors, but I'll tell you what, the replica doors are amazing. So the key is to do your best work and let God figure it out. Be your best, do your best. I just wonder about Lorenzo Ghiberti, if he ever had any idea what those doors would come to mean to so many people and the beauty and how many millions. I mean, think about tens and tens and tens of millions of people who stood before those doors over the years and just looked at the beauty of them and felt drawn to God or something bigger or, something like that. 600 years later, his work is still inspiring people. And that's pretty amazing. Now, the second thing that I would say that is really important is being able to take advantage of those opportunities. And in the book, I have a story of a friend of ours. He was the quarterback of the high school football team here in Arizona, and he got a full ride to USC. So he graduated it in middle of the year. So he heads out in January to go to USC last year, and he shows up and he's the 4th string quarterback. And by the end of spring practice, he's the 2nd string quarterback. And in the first game of last year, USC, the starting quarterback tore his ACL. So in the very first game, Keaton is now the quarterback. He walks out on the field at the Coliseum, and he was supposed to be way back there in fourth string. And Keaton went on to break just about every passing record in USC history that year. Well, in the middle of all this, as his ascendance goes like this, right? A reporter says to him, was it hard for you to make the adjustment to college football? And he says, no, it was actually easy coming from my high school. And the guy kind of got a little offended, like, what are you talking about? Easier. The college game is much harder than the high school game. And Keaton says, do you know who my high school football coach was? And they said, no. And he said, Kurt Warner. That was my high school football. And he taught us to run a West Coast pro style offense. So it was actually easier for him to run the USC offense. And here's what I tell people. And I played quarterback through my first few years of high school. And when you walk up to the line, especially college, and then even more so in the pro, if you've got a full ride to USC, you've got the physical skills, as do all the quarterbacks. They all have the physical skills, right? So what's going to make the difference? So here's what I think happened in those spring practices. When those other three quarterbacks who were trying to beat out the first string quarterback, when they walked to the line, they were trying to figure everything out because it was all new to them. When Keaton walked to the line, he'd been doing this for 2 or 3 years under Kurt. So he saw it immediately, which allowed his physical skills to then place him at a higher level because he knew exactly where to throw the ball because he knew what defense was going to be run and all those kinds of things. So he was prepared. So really, I think it was Kurt Warner and the preparation that he gave him that really made the difference.
So what's the takeaway from Keenan's story?
You have to be prepared. If all of a sudden somebody looks at you and says, you're in, you have to know what you're doing. When Jim Rohn or John Maxwell calls and says, I want you to ghostwrite, you better know how to write. When somebody asks you to come and give a speech, you better have something to say. When somebody offers you the job, you better know what you're doing. You don't get here by not being there prior to getting the job or having the opportunity. So one of the best things you can do is just be constantly preparing yourself for the next level, because the next level will give you an opportunity at some point. I like to use the analogy of a good-looking girl. Remember in high school when we went to the dances? Well, if a good-looking girl walks over to you and says, you want to dance? You darn well better know how to dance.
Okay, Chris, so you said there were 3 pillars. What's the third one?
What to do when what you thought was going to happen doesn't happen. Plot twists happen all the time in our lives. And I tell the story of a good friend of mine, Andre Wadsworth. Andre went to a little Christian high school in Florida, but he wanted to play football and he's a big guy. He wanted to go play at Florida State with Bobby Bowden. Bobby Bowden says, sorry, buddy, but you came from a little high school and I can't give you a scholarship, but I'll let you try to walk on if you want. 4 years later, he was the 3rd pick in the NFL draft.
Right.
So behind Peyton Manning and then one of the biggest busts of all time, Ryan Leaf, and Andre was number 3. 3 years later, he was out of the league because he had 15 knee surgeries. So Andre, he thought his whole life was going to be football. So Andre says, well, I'm a Christian. Maybe I'll start a Bible study for athletes. Well, within a few years, he has 150 athletes in Phoenix, the Coyote hockey team, the Suns, the Cardinals, the Diamondbacks. He's got 150. So he says, maybe we should start a church. So they hired a preacher because he wasn't a preacher. So they hired a preacher and they started this church. That church now is one of the 10 fastest growing churches in America. And every Sunday when you walk into that church, there is this big 6'6" black man standing at the front door, handing out bottles of water and giving hugs. He's one of the loveliest human beings you'll ever meet. Kind, wonderful, beautiful human being. And the name of that church, Impact Church. It's the name of the church. And so what he thought his life was going to be, there was a plot twist and it turned into something else. And Andre would be the first to tell you, far bigger and far greater lasting impact than had he played 15 years in the NFL. And so being able to make those plot twists and to pivot is the word that we hear a lot. Pivoting, being able to pivot when what you thought was going to happen doesn't happen, or what you never thought was going to happen does happen. You need to be able to make those changes, because otherwise you'll just be dead in the water and you'll stop making that impact.
Oh, Chris, that was incredible. And and so the book's coming out when, Chris?
January 5th, 2021.
Let's go ahead and pre-order it. Absolutely. Chris, people want to hear more of you, get to know you. Where should they go?
They can find me on Parler. I'm on Twitter. Instagram, Facebook, Chris Widener Speaker on Facebook, Chris Widener Speaker on Instagram, on Twitter and Parler, I'm Chris Widener. They can find me, chriswidener.com, Amazon, they can search Chris Widener.
Okay, well, you heard it. Not only is Chris our guest today, he's also one of my many coaches. So, Chris, thank you so much for your time. Everyone else, I share with you that what Chris did, he gave you more knowledge, and that's awesome. I mean, really amazing stories. But as we say, knowing isn't doing. So now it's your turn to take this knowledge, implement, and watch your life, watch your business move forward. Until next time, this is Rod Santomassimo with The Massimo Show. I want to thank you for listening to this version of The Massimo Show. And please, please go out and share this with your friends, your colleagues. Heck, share it with your dog. Just share it. And more importantly, just give me some feedback, good, better, and different. We all grow from understanding what our audience wants to hear. So until next time, this is Rod Santomassimo with The Massimo Show. Hey, this is Rod Santomassimo with the Massimo Group. And did you know over the last 12 plus years, we've worked with thousands of independent contractors, solopreneurs, and small business owners in helping them achieve the business and the life that they've always desired. To learn more how we could possibly help you achieve your goals, please visit www.massimo.coach. That's www.massimo.coach.